So I'm Donald, and I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio in the 60s, not the 70s, and started smoking right before I went to college with my gang of high school buddies. And then I went to Brown and Stanford medical school. And I always say, that I would be a different person today if alcohol were my substance of choice for recreation on the weekends than cannabis. So I grew up with cannabis and, you know, enjoyed it for a long time. I had a partner who died of AIDS in 1989, and I was 39, and he smoked every day. And he actually outlived three support groups that all took the AIDS new drug that became available in 1986. He didn't take it because I didn't believe in it, and he lived for 3 years longer than all of them. And we used to travel a lot because living with somebody who's dying, it was nice to give them something to look forward to. So as we traveled, he would smoke, I would smoke, and then I would start to think about he's going to be dead soon, and I would get a little paranoid and dysphoric. So cannabis sort of lost its appeal to me at that time. So then I did my training to become a cancer doctor, which I am, and I worked at San Francisco General. I was chief of cancer there, but I was also working in AIDS in the 80s and 90s. And in 1992, the International AIDS Conference was held in Amsterdam, of all places. And there I was, it was 1992, glancing at the TV in my hotel room, and I saw CNN headline news, Brownie Mary being arrested in Sonoma or whatever. And then I got home to San Francisco, and Mark Jacobson, who was one of my colleagues at San Francisco General, brought me a letter from Rick Doblin, who CLINT mentioned as the founder and president of MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. And the letter suggested that a clinical trial demonstrating the benefits of cannabis in patients with AIDS should come from Brownie Mary's institution, as if she were our dean. So I said, okay, I went to college in the 60s. I can pick up that gauntlet. And first I sent Rick a template for how to write a clinical protocol to submit to the Institutional Review Board at UCSF. And realizing that he wasn't a physician, I figured this would take him a while. But within 1 week, he returned a proposal to study 3 different strains of inhaled cannabis versus dronabinol, or the Delta-9 THC product that was licensed and available for treatment of the AIDS wasting syndrome. And he had a connection with a cannabis growing company in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, and he wanted to import the cannabis for our clinical trial from the Netherlands. And so that's when I started to get involved in the catch-22 of trying to do research with cannabis, because the Netherlands wouldn't let me import their cannabis unless I had a letter from the US saying it was okay, and the US wouldn't give me a letter unless the Netherlands said it was okay. So it was like a catch-22 that was impossible to get out of. And I didn't know what to do. I had a friend that worked in Washington. I said, what should I do? And they said, seek a domestic source. So I said, what does that mean? And they said, well, the only domestic source of cannabis for research is the National Institute on Drug Abuse, or NIDA. So I sent the protocol to NIDA and didn't hear anything for a year. And finally, I got a letter from Alan Leshner, who was, at the time, was the director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And he said that they couldn't provide me with I think I asked for 5.7 kilograms of cannabis because my study was not scientific. And how did we know that the patients, if we were doing an outpatient study, were not going to share their cannabis with their friends and family? So I wrote him back a letter and used the terminology of ACT UP San Francisco or Golden Gate, and said, shame, because so many AIDS patients are dying and you're not allowing us to study this. And then we were together by then, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I got a letter from Washington friend who said that I should just stop trying to do this because it's going to ruin my career, right?
Yes,
And
it's in a fax or
I sent a
something.
fax to Rick Doblin saying, I think I'm done with this. And Clint said,
You said
eh,
on the advice of a colleague in Washington, I'm out or something like that. And I came home and you said, oh, I was like, what? No, 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 no. I was like, you got a career. Who's this damn apparatchik, this political cog who's telling you that you're going to have your career damaged? I was like, screw that, you know? No, no, you've got to stick with it and you've got to push and do it because, that's bullshit.
So then Alan Leshner gave a talk, I believe, in Washington, and Rick Doblin and his MAPS people sort of went up as he finished his talk, and they did a protest in front of the stage saying that he was blocking or obstructing cannabis research. And so he then met with them afterwards and said, well, if Dr. Abrams would submit a proposal that was favorably reviewed, we might reconsider his proposal. So, in the parlance of academic medicine, that means submit it to the NIH for funding and review. So, we got together our team and we decided instead of doing an outpatient study, which was something that they seemed to object to, we would do a study in the inpatient unit, the General Clinical Research Unit at San Francisco General Hospital. And we were going to take 15 people with AIDS and really do the most intensive evaluation while they were either smoking NIDA cannabis or placebo. And we're going to look at the impact on their immune system, the virus, their weight, their lungs, their pulmonary functions. It was really intense. And we submitted it to NIDA for review by peers. And this was in 1996, which is, as you know, when California approved medical marijuana for medical reasons. And it was about the time of the election that I got back my response from the National Institute on Drug Abuse. When you submit a proposal for funding to the government, half of the proposals get scored and the other half are considered not worthy of scoring. And that's what we were, not worthy of scoring. And they sent me the 3 reviewers' comments. And 2 of the 3 reviewers said, we don't know why he would consider studying such a toxic substance. And the 3rd reviewer said, aren't they afraid that these patients with AIDS wasting syndrome, if they smoke marijuana, are going to increase their tumor necrosis factor and get atherosclerosis and myocardial infarctions, heart attacks, which these patients with AIDS wasting did not have the luxury to live long enough to worry about that. So these were really not my peers. And what could I do? They didn't score it. Well, 1996, Clinton got elected for a second term. And I was invited to go to an inaugural event. And so one of my colleagues here at UC said, why don't you go meet with Alan Leshner? It's not like good guy, bad guy. You're both nice guys, because he knew him. Why don't you sit down and have a talk with him? So I met with him and I said, I could continue to write protocols until I'm blue in the face. But if I do a study that shows that cannabis is not effective or perhaps harmful, I think people are still going to use cannabis. And if I do a study that shows it's of benefit and safe, I don't think it's going to make it any more widely available. And that's where he said, that's where you could be wrong. If you do a study that shows that it's of benefit and safe, we might have to reconsider. Although he denied saying that when he came to visit San Francisco a few years later. But then he also told me that we are the National Institute on Drug Abuse, not for drug abuse. So if you want to get funding and cannabis from us, you have to be studying its potential harm and not its benefit, like you were trying to do in the AIDS wasting syndrome. So another key thing that happened in 1996 was protease inhibitors became available for the treatment of patients with HIV. And that really turned everything around. These men who were dying of the wasting syndrome suddenly were resurrected and were healthy and well again. But the protease inhibitors are broken down in the liver by the same enzyme system that also deals with recreational drugs. And there was a report of somebody dying from using ecstasy with protease inhibitors. So this set off a little ding bell in my mind. And I went and looked in my pharmacology text and found that cannabis and cannabinoids are also impacting that same system in the liver. So there was a potential for a bad interaction between cannabis and the protease inhibitors. And I submitted a grant saying I want to see if it was safe for patients on protease inhibitors to add inhaled cannabis to their regimen. And so as long as I was looking for safety and potential toxicity, NIDA was able to fund the study. CLINT calls it my Trojan horse study. And in fact, I had a friend highly placed in the National Institutes of Health who said, Donald, your study, not only did NIDA want to fund it, but many other institutes chipped in because they wanted to be involved. So in 1997, I got $1 million and 1,400 of NIDA's best cannabis cigarettes, 3.96% THC. At that time, nobody knew what CBD was, so 0% CBD. And I did a clinical trial in the inpatient unit, 63 people.
Okay, wait.
With HIV/AIDS.
Tell them why it was the Trojan horse study. Make sure.
Oh, yeah, because in addition, so these are, well, the wasting syndrome disappeared, but in addition to looking at safety, we also looked to see if these patients over 21 days incarcerated in our general clinical research center gained weight as well. So we wanted to look at that, which was the original goal of the wasting protocol. And we did enroll 63 people. They spent 25 days in our clinical research center, and they couldn't leave because we're studying a Schedule I substance, high potential for abuse and no accepted medical use. And they couldn't have visitors either because they might have shared their cigarette with a visitor. So it was an intense study, and we concluded that it was safe, that there was no change in the level of virus in the bloodstream, that there was no change in the immune system, that there was no interaction between the inhaled cannabis or the capsules of dronabinol and the protease inhibitor level. And in fact, we concluded that patients taking or smoking cannabis or taking the dronabinol gained more weight over the course of the 3 weeks than the patients taking a placebo capsule. So that was our first clinical trial. And then we were lucky at the end of the last century. The state of California had a budget surplus. And Senator John Vasconcellos, may he rest in peace, from Southern California, appropriated $3 million a year for 3 years to establish a Center for Medicinal Cannabis Research at the University of California, which was based, or is based, in San Diego. And the whole purpose of that center was to fund clinical trials looking at the potential effectiveness of cannabis in various medical situations. So I received 4 grants from the Center for Medicinal Cannabis Research. The first was to look at smoked cannabis versus placebo in patients with painful HIV-related peripheral neuropathy, damage to the nerve in the hands and the feet that was very debilitating. And then I also at the same time got a study to look at the interaction between cannabis and opiates in cancer patients with pain from bone metastases from breast or prostate cancer. And both studies were 16 patient pilots. And then if they looked effective, determine the sample size needed to do a follow-on placebo control trial. So in the time that I did the 16 patients with HIV and enrolled 25 onto the placebo control trial, I was only able to enroll 2 cancer patients onto the pilot. And so ultimately they took away the funding for that study.